Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's lecture on moral trauma. I'm going to walk you through what moral trauma is, how it develops, and why understanding it matters for mental health and human well being. Moral trauma is one of those concepts that once you understand it, you start seeing it everywhere in veterans returning from war, healthcare workers during the pandemic, first responders, survivors of abuse and many others who face impossible moral dilemmas. So let's dive in. Section 1. What is moral trauma? At its core, moral trauma is a psychological and existential injury. But it's not just any injury, it's a specific kind of wound that happens when we experience events that violate our deeply held moral or spiritual values. Think about that for a moment. We're not talking about physical trauma here. We're not even talking about the kind of psychological trauma that comes from threats to our safety. Moral trauma is about threats to something even more fundamental, our sense of who we are as moral beings. When you experience moral trauma, your most basic beliefs about right and wrong, about how the world should work, about who you are as a person, these get shattered. And that creates a wound that goes beyond the mind and touches the soul itself. Section 2. The three pathways. Now, moral trauma doesn't just happen randomly. There are three specific pathways through which it develops, and I want to go through each one carefully. The first pathway is perpetrating. This is when you commit actions that violate your own moral code. Maybe you were forced to do something you knew was wrong. Maybe you were put in an impossible situation where every choice felt morally wrong. Maybe you made a decision under pressure that haunts you to this day. The key thing about perpetration is that you become the agent of something that goes against your deepest values. You cross a line you never thought you'd cross, and that creates a profound rupture in your moral identity. The second pathway is witnessing. You don't have to be the one doing the act to experience moral trauma. Sometimes just seeing something, observing acts that conflict with your values, watching harm being done to others, that's enough to create moral injury. Think about a medic on a battlefield watching soldiers die and being unable to save them all. Think about a nurse watching patients suffer needlessly due to systemic failures. Think about a child witnessing domestic violence. You're not the perpetrator, but you're bearing witness to something that violates the moral order of how you believe the world should be. And the third pathway, and this one is particularly insidious, is the failure to prevent. This is about being unable to stop something morally wrong from happening. You see it coming, you know it's wrong, but you're powerless to intervene. Maybe you didn't have the authority. Maybe you spoke up but weren't heard. Maybe the system itself prevented you from acting. The helplessness of watching something terrible unfold and being unable to stop it, that creates its own unique form of moral trauma. All three of these pathways share something in common. They create a deep conflict between what you value and what you've experienced, and that conflict is what generates the injury. Section 3. The four core features. So, what does moral trauma actually look like? What are its defining characteristics? There are four core features we need to understand: guilt, shame, betrayal, and loss of moral coherence. Let's start with guilt. Guilt is that feeling of responsibility for actions or inactions. It's the voice in your head saying, I did something wrong or I should have done something. Guilt is actually action focused. It's about specific behaviors and choices. I made the wrong call. I shouldn't have followed that order. I failed to speak up when I should have. Guilt points to what you did or didn't do. But then there's shame, and this is where things get darker. Shame isn't about what you did, it's about who you are. It's not, I did something bad. It's, I am bad. It's not, I made a mistake. It's, I am a mistake. Shame attacks your core identity. It's that deep, corrosive feeling that you are fundamentally flawed, irredeemable, unworthy of love or forgiveness. Where guilt says, I can make amends, shame says, I can never be clean again. And shame is one of the most painful and destructive features of moral trauma. The third feature is betrayal. This can take several forms. Often it's feeling betrayed by others, particularly people in positions of authority, who put you in that impossible situation. Leaders who gave immoral orders, institutions that failed to protect you, systems that prioritized other things over doing what's right. But sometimes the betrayal is even more profound. It's a feeling that you betrayed yourself. You betrayed your own values. You thought you were one kind of person, and then you did something that proved you're not who you thought you were. And there's another layer, too, a sense that the moral order of the universe itself has betrayed you. The world isn't fair. Good people suffer, bad people prosper. The rules you thought governed reality simply don't exist. And that brings us to the fourth feature, loss of moral coherence. This is the existential dimension of moral trauma. Moral coherence is when your worldview makes sense. Your values fit together. You can trust your moral judgment. You have a framework for understanding right from wrong, and that framework helps you navigate the world. But moral trauma shatters that coherence. Suddenly, your values conflict with each other. What you thought was true about the world doesn't match reality. You can't trust your own moral compass anymore because it either led you astray or failed to protect you. This loss of coherence creates profound confusion about meaning and purpose. If you can't trust your values, if the world doesn't work the way you thought it did, then what's the point of anything? This existential disorientation is at the heart of moral trauma. Section 4, Why This Matters. Now you might be wondering, why do we need a specific concept for moral trauma? Don't we already have PTSD and other diagnostic categories? And this is crucial to understand. Moral trauma is different. PTSD focuses on fear-based trauma, threats to physical safety that create hypervigilance and avoidance. Traditional trauma treatment often focuses on processing frightening memories and reducing physiological arousal. But moral trauma isn't primarily about fear. It's about meaning. It's about values. It's about identity and purpose. And that means it requires different approaches to healing. Understanding moral trauma validates the suffering of people who might not fit neatly into PTSD categories, but are clearly struggling. It helps us recognize that wounds to the soul are as real as wounds to the body or mind. This is particularly important for certain populations. Veterans who struggle, not because they were afraid, but because they did or witnessed things that violated their deepest values. Healthcare workers traumatized not by the risk to their safety, but by being forced to make impossible triage decisions. First responders haunted not by danger, but by the children they couldn't save. Recognizing moral trauma means recognizing that these individuals need healing approaches that address questions of forgiveness, meaning, purpose, and moral identity, not just symptom reduction. Conclusion. So let me summarize what we've covered today. Moral trauma is a psychological and existential injury that results from perpetrating, witnessing, or failing to prevent actions that violate deeply held moral or spiritual values. It develops through three pathways: perpetrating acts that violate your values, witnessing such acts, or being unable to prevent them. It manifests through four core features: guilt focused on what you did, shame focused on who you are, betrayal by others or yourself or the moral order itself, and a loss of moral coherence that leaves you disoriented about meaning and purpose. And it matters because it's distinct from other forms of trauma and requires approaches that take seriously the moral and spiritual dimensions of human experience. Moral trauma reminds us that we're not just biological organisms or psychological systems. We're moral beings who need meaning, purpose, and coherence to flourish. When those are damaged, We suffer in ways that go beyond what conventional psychology often addresses. Understanding moral trauma is the first step toward healing it, both for individuals and for the communities and systems that sometimes create it in the first place. Thank you for watching today's lecture. I hope this gives you a deeper understanding of moral trauma and why it's such an important concept for mental health, ethics, and human flourishing. End of lecture.